On the morning my husband of 42 years took his last breath, I sat alone in our quiet kitchen, staring at the empty chair where he used to sit every day with his coffee and newspaper. I kept thinking, how am I supposed to keep living without him? That day feels both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. 18 months have passed since then. My grief counselor kept telling me that the sharp edges of sorrow would soften eventually, that time would help. But nobody warned me about the silence. The kind of silence that settles into every corner of the house, that follows you from room to room, that becomes louder than any noise ever was. My name is Margaret Chen. I was 63 years old when I suddenly had to figure out how to start all over again. Richard and I had been together since we were 20. He handled everything practical, paying the bills, fixing the leaky faucet, calling the plumber, planning our finances, even driving to the grocery store in those last few years when my hips started giving me constant pain and long walks became impossible. I trusted him completely. We both thought we were prepared for whatever came. But when he was gone, I opened the folders and statements and learned the truth. The years of treatments, hospital stays, and medications had drained almost everything we had saved. The life insurance policy was small, just enough to cover the funeral and a simple headstone. Our daughter, Emily, had moved to Seattle for her career years earlier. She was busy building her own life and only managed to call once every few weeks, sometimes once a month if things got hectic. Our son, David, lived in Texas with his wife and 2 young kids. He had his own worries and barely enough time to check in. I wasn't angry at them, they were doing what adults do, but I felt more alone than I ever thought possible. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold the house we had lived in for 30 years, the one where we raised our children, celebrated holidays, planted the maple tree in the backyard together. I paid off as many medical debts as I could, and with what little remained, I rented a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the quieter outskirts of Minneapolis. It was clean, affordable, and lonely. Then came the next challenge, finding work. At 63, with a painful hip that made standing for long hours difficult and office skills that hadn't been updated since the 1990s, the job market wasn't kind. I sent out dozens of applications and got mostly silence in return. But one place, the Good Shepherd Senior Center, was willing to take a chance on me. They needed a part-time receptionist, someone reliable who understood what older folks were going through. The pay was modest, $12 an hour for 25 hours a week, but it was income. More importantly, it gave me a reason to get out of bed, shower, put on decent clothes, and face the day. Every morning I took the city bus from my apartment building into downtown. The ride took about 30 minutes, winding through neighborhoods waking up, past coffee shops opening their doors, past people rushing to work. I always got off 2 stops early. My doctor had insisted that gentle walking would help strengthen my hip without making the pain worse, and honestly, I needed the fresh air and the feeling of moving forward, even if it was slow. That's how I first noticed him. Every single morning, rain or shine, snow or summer heat, an elderly black gentleman sat on the same weathered wooden bench just outside the main public library. He had thick white hair, kind brown eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories, and he always wore the same faded green jacket that had seen better days. In front of him on the ground was a small paper coffee cup, not for drinking, but for spare change. Yet he never begged. He never raised his voice or held out his hand or called to anyone walking by. He simply sat there with quiet dignity, back straight, watching the world hurry past him. Something about the way he carried himself reminded me so strongly of my own father, who had passed many years earlier. My dad had been a factory worker his whole life, proud and hardworking, and even when times were tough he never slouched or complained. This man on the bench had that same quiet strength. He would nod politely at people who met his eyes, and even when most pretended he wasn't there, he never looked bitter. One chilly autumn morning, my heart just tugged. I don't know why that day was different. Maybe the loneliness had been heavier than usual, or maybe I was thinking about my dad. Without planning it, I stopped in front of the bench. I felt awkward and unsure, but I pulled a $5 bill from my purse, folded it small, and gently placed it in his cup. "Have a good day," I mumbled, not knowing what else to say. He looked up at me, really looked, and his eyes were so warm. "God bless you, ma'am," he said softly. "That's a truly kind heart you've got." I walked away quickly because tears were suddenly burning in my eyes, and I couldn't explain why a simple exchange had affected me so deeply. The next morning, I stopped again. And the morning after that. It became a quiet routine. Some days I could spare $5, other days only a handful of quarters and dimes from the bottom of my purse. But I always paused, and soon we started talking. His name was Samuel Washington. He was 74 years old. For 35 years he had taught high school history, shaping young minds, helping teenagers understand the past so they could build a better future. He loved his job. His students loved him. He and his wife, Clara, had been married for 48 years when she passed from cancer 6 years earlier. They never had children, but his students had been like family to him. Then everything unraveled. A fraudulent investment scheme targeted retired teachers and wiped out his pension almost overnight. When the building he'd rented for decades was sold and converted into expensive condos, his landlord gave him 30 days to leave. With no savings and no family to fall back on, he ended up on the streets. Some nights he found space in an overcrowded shelter. Other nights he slept outside. Hearing his story broke something inside me. This wasn't just a homeless man, this was an educator, a good man who had given decades of his life to the community, now reduced to sitting on a cold bench with a paper cup. The injustice of it made my chest ache with an anger I hadn't felt since Richard's illness. One November morning when the wind was biting and the temperature had dipped below freezing, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Samuel," I said, "you shouldn't be out here like this. You deserve warmth, safety, a real home." He just gave me that gentle smile of his. "The Lord provides in his own way, Mrs. Margaret. And look, he sent you to sit with me a while most mornings. That's provision enough." I didn't feel like provision. A few dollars and 10 minutes of conversation didn't seem like nearly enough. But Samuel was always grateful. He asked about my day at the center, about my children, about how my hip was feeling, about whether the grief still woke me up at night. He listened like he truly cared. In a life that had become painfully quiet, he became the one person I could talk to openly. Over the months, he became my friend, maybe the only real friend I had left. Almost a full year passed this way. The seasons turned slowly. Summer heat gave way to colorful fall leaves, then to harsh Minnesota winter snows. And finally to a hesitant spring that brought green buds and longer daylight. At work, I earned a small raise, 50 cents more per hour, but it felt like recognition. Emily called one evening in tears of joy to tell me she was pregnant with her first child. David sent a thoughtful birthday card when I turned 64, with a photo of his kids tucked inside. Little by little, life kept moving. Then came the Tuesday morning in late March that changed everything. I stepped off the bus at my usual early stop and started the familiar walk toward the library. From a distance I could see Samuel was already there, but something was wrong. He wasn't sitting calmly as always, he was standing, shifting his weight, eyes scanning the street with an urgency I'd never seen in him before. The moment he spotted me, he moved faster than I thought possible, crossing the sidewalk and gently but firmly taking my arm. "Mrs. Margaret," he said, voice low and tense, "we need to talk right now, and you need to listen carefully." My heart jumped. "Samuel, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Are you sick?" "No, it's not me." He guided me closer to the library wall, away from the stream of people heading to work. "It's you. There's danger at your job, real danger. You must watch the new bookkeeper, the young woman with the bright red hair. Pay attention to how she handles the donation records. And tonight, do not go back to your apartment. Stay somewhere else. A cheap motel, a friend's place, anywhere but home." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Samuel, you're scaring me. How could you possibly know anything about my workplace? About the bookkeeper?" He glanced around before answering. "I know things because people talk right here on this street, on this bench. They make phone calls, they meet, they say things they'd never say if they noticed the old homeless man listening. What I've heard, it's bad. Please, just trust me. Come back here tomorrow morning and I'll explain everything. But tonight, promise me you'll stay away from your apartment." The fear in his eyes was raw and real. I'd never seen him like this. My voice shook as I answered, "I promise." He released my arm, gave me a quick nod, and returned to his bench, settling into his usual posture as if nothing had happened. I stood frozen for a long moment, heart pounding, before forcing my legs to carry me the rest of the way to the center. The Good Shepherd Senior Center was a modest but warm place. We served around 200 elderly clients with daytime programs, hot meals, exercise classes, crafts, and basic support services. The staff was small, just 15 of us, including cooks, activity coordinators, and cleaners. The director, Patricia Holloway, had been there 12 years. Clients adored her, she always remembered birthdays and medical needs. Staff respected her, she fought hard for funding. I had always thought she was a genuinely good person. The new bookkeeper Samuel mentioned was Tiffany Reynolds, 28 years old, pretty, with striking red hair and an easy, friendly smile. She'd started about 3 months earlier when the previous bookkeeper retired. Everyone liked Tiffany. She was quick, helpful, always willing to pitch in. I had never once suspected anything unusual about her. That morning I sat at the reception desk greeting familiar faces and answering phones, but my mind was miles away. Every time Tiffany walked through the lobby carrying files or chatting with someone, I found myself watching her. She looked completely normal, laughing, efficient, nothing out of place. Around lunchtime, Patricia came out of her office and stopped by my desk. "Margaret, quick question," she said pleasantly. "Have you heard any complaints from donors lately? Anything strange about receipts or amounts?" My stomach tightened. "No, nothing that I can recall." "Why?" She frowned slightly. "It's probably nothing serious. One of our longtime donors called yesterday, said the tax receipt we sent didn't match what she remembered donating. I'm sure it's just a typing mistake. Tiffany's looking into it. Just let me know if anyone else mentions anything odd." She smiled and walked away. I sat very still, staring at my computer screen without seeing it. A donor discrepancy. Tiffany investigating it. Samuel's warning about watching the red-haired bookkeeper and the donation records. It was too specific to be coincidence. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Every glimpse of Tiffany sent a shiver down my spine. Every time Patricia's office door opened, I tensed. By 5 o'clock my nerves were raw. I gathered my coat and bag to leave when Patricia's voice stopped me. "Margaret, before you go, could you step into my office for a minute?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I followed her down the short hallway, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Did she know I suspected something? Was this a trap? She closed the door softly and motioned to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit." I sat, hands clasped tightly in my lap. Patricia took a deep breath. "I need to share something confidential with you. In 12 years running this center, I've never had to deal with anything like this." She paused. "Someone is stealing money from us." The word hung heavy in the air. I've suspected it for a few weeks but didn't have proof until recently. The donation records show deliberate tampering, small amounts skimmed at first, then larger ones. Over the past 3 months alone, we're missing almost $40,000. I whispered, "Oh my God. I hired an independent auditor last week. He confirmed everything." She leaned forward, voice lowering. "Margaret, I'm telling you this because I trust you completely. You've been here over a year, you're honest and steady. But I have to ask, have you noticed anyone accessing financial files who shouldn't? Anyone asking unusual questions about donations? Anyone acting strangely?" My thoughts spun. Samuel's urgent warning. Tiffany. And now Patricia herself, sitting here confessing fraud committed by someone else. How did I know she wasn't the one behind it? How did I know this entire conversation wasn't meant to test me, or set me up? Carefully, I answered, "I honestly haven't seen anything unusual. But I'm only at the front desk, I don't have access to the financial system at all." Patricia nodded slowly. "I know. That's exactly why I'm certain it isn't you. I'm ruling you out." She paused again. "Police will be brought in very soon. There will be interviews, questions. I just need to know I can count on your full cooperation." "Of course," I managed. "Anything you need." "Thank you." She stood. "You can go home now." I left her office on shaky legs. Police. Interviews. And Samuel's voice echoing, "Do not go home tonight." I didn't go home. Instead, I walked several blocks to a budget motel I'd passed many times on the bus. I paid $49 for a plain room with a stiff bed and a flickering TV. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that Samuel was an elderly man who had perhaps become confused or paranoid. But deep down, a cold instinct told me something was terribly wrong. Sleep never came. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day, Patricia's serious face, Tiffany's casual smiles, Samuel's fear. Around 2 in the morning, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Hello, Mrs. Chen." A calm, professional woman's voice. "This is Sergeant Rivera with the Minneapolis Police Department. I'm calling regarding an incident at your apartment building." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of incident?" "There's been a fire. The building has been evacuated, and we're accounting for all residents." "Are you currently at your apartment?" "No," I whispered. I'm staying somewhere else tonight." "That's very fortunate. The fire originated on your floor. Your unit has sustained heavy damage. I couldn't speak for several seconds. The officer patiently gave me instructions: where to check in tomorrow, emergency housing contacts, what to bring if I needed to view the scene. I scribbled it all down with a trembling hand. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed in shock. A fire. On my floor. In my apartment. If I had gone home and slept in my own bed like any normal night. Samuel had known. Somehow, impossibly, he had known. I didn't sleep again. As soon as the sky began to lighten, I called a cab and went straight to the library bench. Samuel was already there. When he saw me approaching, he stood quickly, relief flooding his face. "You're alive," he said, voice cracking. "Thank God. Thank God." I grabbed both his hands. "Samuel, my apartment burned last night. There was a fire. How did you know?" He gently led me to sit beside him. From inside his old green jacket he pulled out a child's spiral notebook, pages filled with careful handwriting. "I've been watching your apartment building for the past 3 weeks," he said quietly. "Ever since I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold." "Overheard where?" "Right here." He gestured to the bench, the sidewalk, the street around us. "People sit here to talk privately. They make phone calls. They meet friends or business associates. They never imagine the homeless man is paying attention. But I was." He opened the notebook. Dates, times, short descriptions, all written in neat teacher handwriting. 3 weeks ago, 2 men sat on this very bench. They were discussing large amounts of money being moved, money taken from programs for elderly people. They mentioned the Good Shepherd Senior Center by name. Said the operation was running smoothly, that the bookkeeper was handling everything perfectly, and that no one suspected a thing. He turned the page. Then one mentioned a problem. Said there was an old lady at the front desk who had started poking around the donation records. Said she was becoming a risk. My throat went dry, but I never poked around. I never asked any questions. "I know that now," Samuel said heavily. "But someone believed, or wanted to believe, you had. And they decided you needed to be removed." He turned another page. "Last night, the same 2 men came back. They talked about arranging a fire tonight. Making it look like an electrical fault. They said your full name, Mrs. Margaret. They said your apartment number." I felt sick. "Who are these men? Did you recognize them?" He reached into his jacket again and carefully pulled out an old flip phone. He opened the photo gallery and showed me a grainy but clear picture. Patricia Holloway standing on a sidewalk talking to a tall, thin man with sharp features I didn't recognize. "I took this 2 days ago," Samuel explained. "I followed them when they left the bench area. They went to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and met 2 others." He swiped to another photo, Patricia, the tall man, and 2 more people I'd never seen. "I believe your director is the one running everything," he said softly. "The bookkeeper is likely helping her. And they were planning to pin the missing money on you. Once you were gone in a tragic accident, the investigation would close quickly. No loose ends." Everything fell into place with horrifying clarity. Patricia's confession to me yesterday. Talking about police and interviews. Making sure I knew fraud had been discovered. She was preparing to frame me. And the fire was meant to silence me forever. "I have to go to the police," I said. "Yes." Samuel pressed the notebook into my hands. "Everything I witnessed, every conversation, every date and time, it's all here. The photos are on this phone. It's not fancy evidence, but it's honest." I looked at this man, this gentle, homeless man I had shared spare change and small talk with for a year. This man who had spent weeks quietly gathering proof, watching my building, risking his own safety. "Samuel, why would you do all this for me?" He gave me that familiar soft smile. "Because you treated me like a person, Mrs. Margaret. From the very first morning, you stopped. You looked me in the eye. You spoke to me with respect. Do you know how rare that is for someone in my position? You made me feel visible again." Tears streamed down my face. "I spent 35 years teaching children about history," he continued quietly. "About justice. About courage. About using whatever knowledge and strength you have to help others. When I lost my home, my pension, my health, I thought that part of my life was over. That I had nothing left to give. But then you came along, and I saw evil happening, and I realized I could still do something. I could still matter. You saved my life," I whispered. "And you gave me back a reason to live," he replied, squeezing my hands. "Now go. Take this to the police. Tell them everything. And don't worry about me, I'll be all right." The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind. I went straight to the police station with Samuel's notebook and phone. At first the detective seemed skeptical, an elderly homeless man's handwritten notes. But as he read through the detailed timeline and saw the photos clearly showing Patricia, his expression changed. Investigators were assigned. Professional auditors were brought in. Federal agents joined when the scope widened. What they uncovered was staggering. Patricia Holloway had been orchestrating fraud for over 5 years, not just at Good Shepherd, but at 3 other senior centers across Minnesota. She and her accomplices had stolen more than $2 million meant for meals, medical transport, and activities for vulnerable elderly people. Her brother, the tall, sharp-faced man, was a financial consultant who helped launder the money through fake accounts. Tiffany Reynolds, the red-haired bookkeeper, was Patricia's niece, hired specifically to manipulate records. A 4th man had been paid to set the fire in my building. They had been preparing to close down the Good Shepherd operation and disappear with the remaining funds. But they needed a scapegoat to take the blame when discrepancies were inevitably noticed. I was the perfect target, newer employee, no access to defend myself, and conveniently, lost, in a tragic fire. The police found traces of accelerant in my apartment and matched the purchase of gasoline to Patricia's brother. All 4 were arrested within days. The trial lasted several months. I took the stand and told the jury everything, my grief, my friendship with Samuel, the warnings, the fire, the evidence. Samuel testified too. Someone had lent him a proper suit, and he spoke with the calm authority of the experienced teacher he was. He explained his notes, his photos, his reasons. The jury listened intently. Sentences were severe: 15 years for Patricia, 12 for her brother, 5 for Tiffany, 20 for the arsonist. Justice was served, but the real healing, for me, was just beginning. After the trial ended, I went looking for Samuel to thank him properly, to celebrate together. But his bench was empty. The shelters hadn't seen him in days. Panic rose. What if Patricia's associates had found him first? What if he'd been hurt? 3 days later I located him in a hospital ward. He had collapsed on the street from severe dehydration, malnutrition, and advanced untreated diabetes. His kidneys were failing. The doctors weren't optimistic. I sat by his bedside every day, holding his thin hand, crying quietly. "Don't cry, Mrs. Margaret," he whispered weakly but still with that gentle smile. "You've already done more for me than anyone has in years." "It's not enough," I said. "You saved my life. I need you to be okay." Over the next month I fought for him the way he had fought for me. I contacted social workers, legal aid organizations, housing authorities. I wrote letters to newspapers and local politicians telling Samuel's story, a beloved retired teacher robbed of everything, now the hero who brought down a major theft ring. The community responded with overwhelming generosity. Donations poured in to cover medical bills. A pro bono lawyer took his case and successfully recovered a portion of his lost pension. A nonprofit found him a small, clean apartment. Even the school district where he'd taught for decades established the Samuel Washington Education Fund to help retired teachers in crisis. By early summer, Samuel was strong enough to leave the hospital. I was there on move-in day, helping arrange donated furniture, bookshelves filled with history books people had sent, and framed photos of his late wife Clara that I'd helped track down and print. He walked slowly through the rooms, touching the walls as if making sure it was real. "Mrs. Margaret," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "you didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," I replied, sitting beside him on the new couch. "You pulled me out of loneliness and emptiness as much as you pulled me out of danger. You gave me back hope and friendship when I had none. This is the very least I could do." He was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at trees swaying in the breeze. Then he spoke softly. "Every September, on the first day of school, I used to tell my students the same thing. History isn't just names and dates in a book. History is the choices we make every single day, how we treat one another, whether we walk past suffering or stop to help. Those small choices send out ripples across lives and years in ways we can never predict." He turned to me. "Ripples, Mrs. Margaret." I smiled through fresh tears. "Ripples. That's right. One ordinary morning you paused at my bench and placed $5 in my cup. You could have kept walking like everyone else. But you stopped. That was one small, kind choice. And look at the waves it created: justice served, lives saved, homes restored, friendship forged." I thought about the chain of events. If I hadn't stopped that first day, if I hadn't kept stopping, if Samuel hadn't felt seen and valued enough to risk everything for me, none of it would have happened. "The world can be cruel," he continued. "People can forget each other's humanity. But kindness is real too. And when we choose kindness, even in the smallest ways, we change things. We turn tiny ripples into powerful waves. I'm 65 now. More than a year has passed since the trial ended. My daughter Emily gave birth to a beautiful granddaughter named Eleanor, and I flew out to Seattle to hold her for the first time. David brought his whole family up for Christmas last year. We filled the little apartment with laughter and noise, and it felt almost like old times. I still work part-time at a different senior center across town, and I make extra sure financial records are watched closely. I still take the bus most days and get off early too. Walk. But now, every morning, I stop at a certain ground floor apartment building a few blocks from the library. Samuel answers the door with a warm smile, looking healthier every month. His diabetes is managed. His partial pension gives him security. He volunteers at the public library 3 days a week, tutoring kids in history and reading, telling them about justice and courage and the power of small choices. Sometimes people ask me what the biggest lesson was from everything that happened. They expect me to talk about corruption hiding in trusted places, or how dangerous greed can be, or to warn about who you can trust. But that isn't the lesson I carry. The lesson is simpler and deeper. Kindness matters more than we realize. Every single act, every time you pause instead of rushing past, every time you truly see someone others ignore, every time you offer dignity and respect, you are sending out a ripple. You never know who is watching. You never know how far that ripple will travel. You never know whose life it might touch, or whose life might one day touch, and save, yours. Samuel Washington was a homeless elder sitting quietly on a city bench. I was a grieving widow with a few dollars and a heavy heart. Together, through one small act of kindness repeated day after day, we exposed a major crime ring, sent thieves to prison, recovered millions meant for vulnerable seniors, restored a good man's home and health, and built a friendship that will last the rest of our days. All because I stopped one ordinary morning and placed $5 in a paper cup. So wherever you are right now, whoever you are, choose kindness today. Stop for the person everyone else walks past. Look them in the eye. Offer whatever small thing you can. You never know what beautiful, life-changing waves might come from that one quiet moment. It happened to me. It saved me. And it gave me the greatest friendship I've ever known.